For years, Burkina Faso faced a painful energy reality. Nearly half of the electricity used by the country in 2024 came from outside its borders. Then, on the 21st of July 2026, something concrete changed at Pabre. A new thermal power plant began feeding 50 megawatts into the national grid. And the most important part of this story is that Pabre is not the finish line. It is the opening move. The plant represents an investment of roughly 18 billion CFA francs, about $32 million. It contains 72 generating units and was completed in roughly 90 days, compared with a contractual schedule of 120 days. From the signing of the agreement to operation, the process took about 5 months. For a country that has repeatedly struggled with power shortages during periods of intense heat, those numbers matter. But do not mistake 50 megawatts for a miracle. Burkina Faso has not suddenly solved every electricity problem, but demand is growing. Old generating units still require repairs, fuel costs remain a challenge, and imported electricity continues to play an important role. What Pabre provides is something different. It provides evidence that new domestic generating capacity can be brought online quickly. And that is where the story becomes much larger. The government says Pabre belongs to a wider group of projects intended to add close to 220 megawatts. Other plants are appearing or being reinforced across the country, while an even larger 120 megawatt project at Saaba points toward the next stage. Under Captain Ibrahim Traore, electricity is increasingly being presented not simply as a public utility, but as a foundation for industrialization and national sovereignty. The question is whether Burkina Faso can turn that political ambition into reliable power for homes, workshops, mines, and factories. If you want to follow Africa through verified developments rather than slogans, subscribe and stay with us. Because by the end of this story, we will also examine the difficult question: is Burkina Faso truly escaping energy dependence or merely changing the form that dependence takes? The answer lies beyond one ribbon cutting, in what happens next across the entire national grid. Pabre becomes more significant when we stop looking at it as an isolated 50 megawatt plant and start looking at the map. Burkina Faso says it is pursuing a group of 7 electricity projects designed to bring close to 220 megawatts of additional capacity into the broader system. Some are already producing power, others are still being completed. That distinction matters. By August 2026, 4 important projects alone accounted for 126.4 megawatts of new generating capacity. Pabre contributed 50 megawatts, Bobo Two added 26.4 megawatts, Koudougou contributed another 25 megawatts, and Kaya added 25 megawatts. Koudougou offers a particularly useful example of what this strategy means beyond the numbers. For years, the city depended heavily on electricity transmitted from Ouagadougou. Its new 25 megawatt plant gives Koudougou a local source of generation. The project cost roughly 15 billion CFA francs, or about $27 million. Kaya received a plant of similar capacity and investment. This matters because energy security is not only about how much electricity a country can produce, it is also about where that electricity is produced. Concentrating generation around a few major centers can leave distant communities more exposed when transmission problems occur. Developing regional production creates additional options. Burkina Faso is also reinforcing Komsilga, where authorities have planned another 50 megawatts of capacity. The pattern is becoming clearer. Instead of relying on one enormous project to transform the system overnight, the government is assembling capacity across several locations. Still, one number requires caution. The nearly 220 megawatts announced by the government should not be described as 220 megawatts already operating. Projects move through construction and commissioning at different times. What can be said is that 126.4 megawatts from Pabre, Bobo Two, Koudougou, and Kaya had entered production according to government reporting. That is already enough to reveal the strategy. Build quickly, spread production geographically, and reduce dependence on a few supply points. But the next project changes the scale completely. At Saaba, Burkina Faso is preparing a plant rated at 120 megawatts. If Pabre demonstrated speed, Saaba will test whether that speed can survive when the ambition becomes much larger. If Pabre shows how quickly Burkina Faso can add emergency generating capacity, Saaba will test whether that momentum can be expanded to a much larger scale. On the same day Pabre was inaugurated, authorities launched work on the Ouaga Southeast project at Saaba. Its plant capacity is 120 megawatts, about 2.4 times the output of Pabre. The estimated investment exceeds 133 billion CFA francs, roughly $240 million. Authorities expect the plant to enter service in 2027. If completed as planned, it would represent a major addition to our national electricity system that is already racing to keep pace with growing demand. But there is an important difference between these two projects. Pabre is operating, Saaba is not. Its 120 megawatts therefore cannot be counted as electricity currently available to Burkina Faso. Construction announcements create expectations, but energy sovereignty is ultimately measured by machines producing electricity and delivering it reliably to customers. There is another reason for caution. Official accounts have provided conflicting descriptions of the fuel planned for Saaba. Rather than pretending that uncertainty does not exist, the important fact for now is the scale of the project and what its completion could mean for the national grid. For Burkina Faso, Saaba represents more than another construction site. It tests whether the rapid approach demonstrated at Pabre can work when the investment, infrastructure, and generating capacity become substantially larger, and the country needs that scale. Electricity demand has been rising as cities expand, businesses grow, and the government pushes for greater industrial production. Adding power simply to meet today's shortage will not be enough if tomorrow's factories create another shortage. That is why the government has set a much more ambitious objective: eventually push national electricity production above domestic demand. Whether Burkina Faso can reach that point remains uncertain. Saaba must still be completed, commissioned, fueled, maintained, and connected effectively to the grid. Meanwhile, another energy battle is already underway. It does not involve groundbreaking ceremonies or new construction. Inside older plants at Koudougou and Ouaga Two, technicians are trying to recover generating capacity that Burkina Faso already owns but cannot fully use. Sometimes the fastest new megawatt is not new at all. It is an old machine brought back to life. While new power plants attract attention, Burkina Faso is fighting another battle behind the walls of older facilities. At Koudougou and Ouaga Two, the objective is not to build everything from the ground up. It is to recover generating capacity that already exists but has been unavailable because of breakdowns, aging equipment, and maintenance needs. This matters because a country facing electricity shortages cannot always wait for years of new construction. If an existing generator can be repaired and returned to service, that capacity can strengthen the grid without building an entirely new plant. At Koudougou, technicians have been working to restore generating units and recover lost output. During inspections in early 2026, Energy Minister Yakuba Zabreguba pressed technical teams to accelerate repairs before the period of intense heat, when electricity demand traditionally places greater pressure on the system. Ouaga Two presents a similar challenge. Some generating units had suffered failures, requiring inspections and technical diagnosis before repairs could begin. The objective is straightforward: return as many usable machines as possible to service and increase the amount of dependable electricity available to the national network. There is an important lesson here. Installed capacity and available capacity are not the same thing. A generator may appear in national statistics, but if it is broken, waiting for spare parts, or undergoing maintenance, families and businesses receive no electricity from it. That is why Burkina Faso's energy campaign has two fronts. The first is visible in places such as Pabre, Kaya, and Koudougou, where new generating capacity is being installed. The second is less dramatic but equally important, maintaining and repairing the infrastructure the country already owns. This also exposes one of the tests facing Captain Ibrahim Traore's energy strategy. Building quickly creates momentum, but maintaining equipment year after year determines whether that momentum lasts. And thermal generators are only part of the picture. Burkina Faso is also trying to capture more energy from another resource available every day across the Sahel: sunlight. At Gonsin, a 42 megawatt peak solar facility demonstrates why the country's search for greater energy sovereignty cannot depend on thermal power alone. Thermal power can provide electricity when the sun is down, but Burkina Faso does not appear to be betting its energy future on fuel-burning generators alone. At Gonsin, also known as Ouaga Northwest, a solar power plant rated at 42 megawatts peak offers another piece of the country's evolving strategy. The facility entered service in 2024 as part of the broader Yelin Solar Program. That program also includes smaller solar facilities in other parts of Burkina Faso and an energy storage component designed to improve the usefulness of electricity generated from sunlight. The logic is easy to understand. Burkina Faso has abundant sunshine. Solar generation can reduce the amount of fuel needed during daylight hours and diversify the sources feeding the national grid. But solar power is not magic. A factory that needs electricity through the evening cannot simply stop operating when sunlight disappears. Clouds, dust, storage capacity, transmission infrastructure, and maintenance all affect how much useful electricity reaches consumers. Even something as ordinary as cleaning solar panels matters. During an inspection of Gonsin in 2026, Energy Minister Yakuba Zabreguba emphasized improved cleaning of the panels so they could capture solar energy more effectively. It was a simple reminder that energy sovereignty depends as much on maintenance as construction. Put the pieces together, and Burkina Faso's strategy begins to show four distinct layers. First, build new capacity quickly, as Pabre demonstrates. Second, recover existing capacity at facilities such as Koudougou and Ouaga Two. Third, diversify generation by combining thermal power with solar energy. Fourth, distribute generating capacity across several regions, rather than concentrating everything around one location. None of these approaches is sufficient alone. Thermal plants require fuel, solar plants require sunlight, storage, and a capable grid. Old generators require spare parts and skilled technicians. New plants require financing and long-term maintenance. But combining them gives Burkina Faso something valuable: options. And options are at the heart of genuine energy security. The country is not merely searching for more megawatts. It is trying to reduce the risk that one failed machine, one disrupted supply route, or one external supplier can leave too much of the nation vulnerable. That brings us to the central problem behind this entire campaign. Just how dependent has Burkina Faso been on electricity coming from outside its borders? To understand why Burkina Faso speaks so often about energy sovereignty, look beyond the new power plants and examine where its electricity has historically come from. In 2024, roughly 49% of the country's electricity supply came from imports. Burkina Faso imported about 2,007 gigawatt hours of electricity that year, worth approximately $164 million. Most of that imported electricity came from Ghana, with Côte d'Ivoire providing another important share. Regional power trade has helped Burkina Faso meet demand that domestic generation could not fully satisfy. Without those connections, electricity shortages could have been considerably worse. So importing electricity is not automatically a weakness. In fact, interconnected power systems can make neighboring countries stronger. When one country has inexpensive electricity available, another can buy it instead of operating a more expensive generator. Cross-border connections can also provide emergency support when domestic equipment fails. The vulnerability appears when dependence becomes too concentrated. If a major supplier faces its own shortage, maintenance problem, or surge in domestic demand, Burkina Faso cannot control what happens inside that country's power system. In 2025, supply difficulties in Ghana demonstrated how problems beyond Burkina Faso's borders could place additional pressure on electricity availability at home. This explains why the government's definition of sovereignty should not be confused with isolation. Burkina Faso does not need to disconnect itself from Ghana or Côte d'Ivoire. It needs enough domestic capacity to negotiate and operate from a stronger position. Imports can then become a strategic choice rather than an unavoidable necessity. There is also an uncomfortable complication. New thermal plants may reduce the need to import electricity, but they still require fuel. Because Burkina Faso imports petroleum products, replacing imported electricity with electricity generated domestically from imported fuel does not eliminate external dependence. It changes its form. That distinction will matter for years. True energy security therefore requires more than additional generators. It requires diversified power sources, reliable fuel supplies, stronger transmission networks, maintenance, storage, regional cooperation, and manageable costs. For Captain Ibrahim Traore, however, the reason for pursuing greater domestic capacity reaches beyond electricity itself. His larger argument is economic. Without dependable power, Burkina Faso cannot industrialize at the speed its government wants. For Ibrahim Traore, the energy campaign makes the most sense when viewed as part of a larger industrial strategy. Electricity is not supposed to be the final achievement. It is supposed to power the next stage of Burkina Faso's economy. Traore has described energy as a key sector for industrial development. His government has simultaneously promoted domestic processing in areas ranging from agriculture to construction materials. The logic is straightforward. A country that exports raw materials but imports many finished products sends part of the value of those resources abroad. Processing more goods at home can retain more economic activity, create jobs, and develop local skills. But factories need something speeches cannot provide: reliable electricity. A small workshop can lose hours of production during an outage. A larger industrial plant may face damaged equipment, interrupted production schedules, and higher costs when power becomes unreliable. If Burkina Faso wants more processing plants, mines, businesses, and manufacturing facilities, electricity demand will rise alongside industrialization. This creates a difficult race. The government is adding generating capacity, but economic development itself can increase demand. Today's additional 50 megawatts may help close a shortage, while tomorrow's new factories create another need for power. That is why the stated ambition goes beyond reducing blackouts. Authorities have spoken about eventually reaching a point where national electricity production exceeds domestic demand. If achieved with reliable and affordable power, that would provide a stronger foundation for industrial expansion. But it remains an objective, not a completed achievement. Traore also should not be portrayed as personally constructing every plant. Pabre, for example, was inaugurated by Prime Minister Jean-Emmanuel Ouedraogo. Traore's role is better understood as setting the political direction under which energy, industrialization, and national sovereignty are increasingly linked. That distinction matters because long-term success will depend on institutions, engineers, Sonabel employees, private partners, financing, maintenance, and thousands of workers, not one individual alone. The deeper question is whether Burkina Faso can turn political momentum into a durable system that survives beyond individual projects and leaders. And that question is already expanding beyond Burkina Faso. In Mali and Niger, the Alliance of Sahel States is also exploring how energy cooperation can support a broader vision of economic sovereignty across the region. Burkina Faso's energy push becomes more significant when viewed beyond its national borders. Mali and Niger, its partners in the Alliance of Sahel States, face many of the same structural questions. How can countries with limited electricity systems industrialize, process more of their own resources, and reduce vulnerability without cutting themselves off from regional cooperation? The Alliance of Sahel States is beginning to address that question institutionally. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have discussed harmonizing energy policies and regulatory frameworks, strengthening cooperation over strategic resources, and developing electricity connections that could improve exchanges among the three countries. This reveals an important distinction. Energy sovereignty does not require every African country to stand alone. A stronger model could combine greater domestic production with stronger regional connections. Burkina Faso can build more generating capacity while still exchanging electricity with neighboring states. Mali and Niger can do the same. The objective is not isolation. It is reducing one-sided dependence while creating more choices inside the region. This is also where the energy story intersects with Pan-Africanism. For decades, one of the central economic questions facing Africa has been how to retain more value from its own resources. Countries can export raw materials and later purchase higher value products made elsewhere, or they can develop more of the electricity, infrastructure, skills, and industries required to process those resources closer to home. That does not mean the Pabre plant was built specifically as a Pan-African project. It means Burkina Faso's energy campaign can be understood within a broader political movement that connects control over infrastructure with economic sovereignty. The scale must also remain in perspective. Burkina Faso's current expansion should not be called the fastest or largest electricity transformation in African history. Larger African economies have developed individual projects measured in hundreds or even thousands of megawatts. What makes Burkina Faso remarkable is the change relative to its own starting point. For a smaller electricity system, adding 50 megawatts here, 25 megawatts there, recovering disabled generators, and expanding solar capacity can produce a meaningful national effect. The real test for the Alliance of Sahel States is whether that momentum can become lasting regional capability. If cooperation produces stronger grids, more reliable electricity, and more African processing of African resources, energy could become one practical foundation for the sovereignty its leaders repeatedly promise. Burkina Faso's energy campaign is unfolding alongside a much larger political confrontation. Since Ibrahim Traore came to power, Western governments, institutions, and media have raised serious concerns about military rule, restrictions on political activity, press freedom, human rights, security, and the country's growing distance from France. Those concerns should not simply be dismissed because Burkina Faso has built new power plants. A 50-megawatt facility cannot answer questions about civil liberties. At the same time, political criticism cannot erase a functioning power plant or make new generating capacity disappear. That distinction is essential. There is no solid evidence that the West is opposing the Pabre project because it fears Burkina Faso becoming energy sovereign. Claims that Western powers are terrified by one new African power plant may generate attention online, but they go beyond what the evidence supports. The stronger criticism is economic. Burkina Faso may reduce its dependence on imported electricity by building thermal plants at home, but those generators still need fuel. The country imports petroleum products. In other words, part of the dependency can move from imported electricity to imported fuel. There is also the question of cost. Thermal generation can become expensive when international oil prices rise. Maintaining dozens of generators requires spare parts, skilled technicians, and continuous financing. New capacity must also be supported by transmission and distribution infrastructure capable of carrying that electricity reliably to customers. So the real test of Captain Ibrahim Traore's strategy will not be how many ribbon-cutting ceremonies Burkina Faso can organize. It will be what happens 5 or 10 years afterward. Are the generators still running? Have blackouts declined? Can businesses afford the electricity? Can Sonabel maintain the equipment without creating an unsustainable financial burden? Those questions are not attacks on sovereignty. They are how sovereignty is measured. The fairest assessment therefore lies between two extremes. Burkina Faso should not be portrayed as an energy miracle that has already escaped dependence. Nor should its infrastructure gains be ignored simply because its government remains politically controversial. Pabre is real. The challenges are real too, and that combination may offer the most useful lesson of all, because other African countries watching Burkina Faso must decide which parts of this experiment are worth adapting and which mistakes they should avoid. What then can the rest of Africa learn from Burkina Faso? The first lesson is surprisingly practical. Do not assume every new megawatt requires a new power station. Repair existing generators. Maintain what already works. Then add new capacity where the system needs it most. Second, diversify. Pabre demonstrates the value of rapidly deployable thermal generation. Gonsin demonstrates the opportunity provided by solar power. Kosodo and Waga too demonstrate the importance of recovering existing assets. Kaya and Koudougou show why distributing generation across different regions can strengthen the system. Third, sovereignty should not mean isolation. Burkina Faso can increase domestic production while continuing to trade electricity with its neighbors. The same principle could serve the alliance of Sahel states. Stronger national systems connected through stronger regional networks can give countries more options, not fewer. Fourth, megawatts alone are not enough. Electricity must remain reliable and affordable. Plants need fuel, spare parts, trained workers, financing, transmission lines, and years of disciplined maintenance. This may be the most important test for Ibrahim Traore. His government has connected electricity with industrialization, economic sovereignty, and a broader Pan-African ambition. But the lasting measure of that vision will not be political speeches. It will be whether factories can operate, businesses can expand, and ordinary families can depend on the light staying on. For supporters of Pan-Africanism, Burkina Faso offers a compelling experiment. For skeptics, it offers measurable claims that can be tested over time. And for the African Union and other African governments, it raises a question larger than one country. Can Africa build more of the infrastructure required to transform African resources into African prosperity? Pabre's 50 megawatts cannot answer that question alone. Neither can Captain Ibrahim Traore. But Burkina Faso is attempting something important, turning sovereignty from a political idea into physical capacity. Perhaps that is where Africa's new possibilities begin, not with declarations, but with functioning infrastructure. Now the real test begins. If you believe other African nations can learn something from Burkina Faso, share your view in the comments. And subscribe to follow this Pan-African story as we track whether today's promises become tomorrow's lasting power. Thank you for being here and watching our video. Every piece of content on this channel is carefully researched, written, edited and reviewed by our team to ensure it reflects our own work and editorial approach. We do not rely on automated mass production. Each video presents our perspective on current events related to President Ibrahim Traore and developments across Africa.